this is residential one, lab number 2. If you look at this particular diagram, it's very similar to the one we did last week. Our main differences this week are gonna be in how I grade you on it. Last week we were just beginning to feel out how to work the walls and how to get all of our pieces in place. This week I'm gonna grade you on, did you select the proper boxes? Did you select the proper devices? Did you run your wire neatly? Did you use the proper strapping on the wire? Did you run your home run from the correct place? Do you have 6 inches of free conductor inside of your box? Do you have an excess of outer jacket on your wire inside your box? Are all of your terminations made up properly on the devices? Is the insulation cut back too far? Are your hooks turned properly? Are they turned or clockwise around the screw? Are your wire nuts on properly? Is the insulation cut back too far behind your wire nuts? Those are going to be the things that I'm gonna grade you on this week. And so you need to make sure that as you're selecting all your pieces, that you select what you need and that you put all those pieces in correctly. And you're gonna have 100 points total for this lab. And so each box on that lab is gonna count for a portion of that. And did you select the right one? Has it have the right device? Are all the connections made correctly? It's gonna affect your grade on this particular lab. Other things that are gonna, the only other thing that will affect your grade on this lab, right, is are you wearing your safety equipment? Do you have your safety glasses on? Do you have any jewelry taken off? Are you wearing closed-toed shoes? We're gonna take the lab safety seriously, as you should take that seriously when you're out in the field working, because you've only got one set of hands, you only got one set of eyes. You wanna protect those things. So this is our diagram for this week, right? It's very similar to last week. We've got 2 receptacles, a switch, and 2 lights, right? These all have a position, that corresponds on the wall, right? Your diagram tells you that this receptacle needs to be a certain height to the bottom of the box or to the top of the box. This switch has a certain height, right? We're gonna count those things, and if you haven't placed it correctly, we're gonna count off for that. It's gonna tell you that it needs to be a certain distance from the wall. We got 1/2 inch sheetrock? Are we talking about 3/8 sheetrock? There'll be a little bit of leniency there, right? Because we're using the same studs that the previous class used, and so if the previous class put the nail holes in the wrong spot, there may be a little bit of the box trying to drift into those previous nail holes. But do you understand? Can you tell me? If that happens, can you tell me like, hey, I tried to put the box here, but the nail holes were there and it wouldn't go into that particular spot, right? So we're gonna run our wire here. We've got our home run, right? It tells us where our home run's at, right? It told us that last week and I didn't see it. And so when I had everybody wired up last week, we actually wired it up with the home run in the wrong spot. This week we wanna make sure we get that right? Your lab sheet for this week tells you that our home run is coming in a particular spot, and we'll look at that lab sheet. And then we're gonna go through our studs to our other receptacle, right? We're gonna make sure that we put our straps to strap our cable to the stud. We're gonna pull up to our switch to power our lights, right? This is gonna be our power leg to our switch, and then we're going to tie to both of our lights, right? And it's, we're not looking for a loop of wire, but we show it as a loop in when we're drawing it in, right? But we want this neat and tidy. We don't want to cut across like this. We want to go up and straight across, or up and straight across, and then down to where the light's at, right? Where we have room for a strap. These are the things that I'm going to be looking for when we do this particular one. I'm going to once again go over a couple of things on wire and plug, so that we had a couple of groups that had some difficulties with that. I'm going to show you some close-ups of what I'm expecting when you guys wire in a outlet. When we're choosing our outlet, we also want to be sure that we choose an outlet that has both of the tabs in place, so that when we're done wiring everything up and we test it, it will work properly, right? If one of these tabs is not in place, then your system isn't going to work properly, and we're not going to be able to test it properly. And I'm going to count off of that this week, right? Because I'm telling you right now, make sure to check and grab a receptacle out of the bin that has both tabs on it. Some of them are missing a tab. Right, so our first step, right, we've got to strip our wire back, right? And so when we say that we're going to have 6 inches of free conductor, right, I'm not talking about having 6 inches of cable pulled into the box, right? We need 6 inches of free conductor. So we're going to strip this outer jacket all the way back to where it comes into the box, right? Stripping the outer jacket all the way back to where it comes into the box. Being careful when we cut that jacket off, not to cut into any wires. We don't want to nick any wires. You're gonna have problems with arc fault breakers tripping if you just nick that wire. Even if you don't cut all the way through the jacket of the wire, it can cause problems with arc fault breakers. So our first step here, we're going to twist our wires together, our grounding wires together. Forming a good solid bond between those two wires. Then I'm pulling off, leaving plenty of conductor there to tie into our receptacle. I'm grabbing a grounding wire nut, right? Code says that these two wires have to be mechanically bonded together, right? We can't just twist them together. Now this is one of those places in the code where you have something that's code, and then you have what is the city code, right? And so in some places the city code will be more strict than the NEC. In some places it can be less strict in certain situations, and so a lot of municipalities do not require this bonding wire nut. Twisting them together is enough. But the code says it needs to be there, so we're going to put it in there today. All right, so now I've folded that back out of our way. This first one I'm going to wire through the receptacle, right? So we're going to separate our black side and our white side here. Cut these off to the same length. Stripping off about 3/4 of an inch of wire, right? If you're, there is a, I'm a tad long there. We'll trim a little bit of that off. And then we're going to bend a hook. Right, we're bending a hook. This is our neutral side, so we're going to tie this into the long side. Should be the silver screw. The brass is worn off of some of these. Some of these are older receptacles. They've been used. But you should have a brass screw and a silver screw, right? We're around the clockwise, and if you'll notice, like, all of that wire is underneath the head of that screw. It's not protruding from the head of that screw. So as I tighten this down, it's pulling it in tight. And our insulation is in between, it's been cut between the screw head and the back of the receptacle. There's not there's not bare wire protruding behind the receptacle. That is massively important, right? We don't want any bare wire to be protruding outside of the side of this receptacle. We don't want for our wire to have been bent so that there's a long piece of wire that as we tighten this down, that long piece of wire sticks out beyond the end of the receptacle, right? It's all behind the screw. That's what our goal is. We want all the bare wire to be behind that screw so that once we have clamped down on that wire, it's protected. So now we flip that over. Strip them back about 3/4 of an inch. You're looking for consistency here, and right, like I'm not as practiced as I once was, and so it just takes practice. So we're gonna tie in behind the screw. All right, so if you notice, right, my insulation here, I'm coming around to the right side. My insulation is just inside of the edge of the receptacle. As I tighten this down, it's going to pull that in farther, so that now that insulation is pulled up closer to that screw. We don't have any uninsulated wire protruding from the back of the receptacle. And we're going to install our grounding wire. Our grounding wire goes around the green screw. This is the screw that's attached to the yoke, right? Last week, a couple of our groups grabbed the wrong switch. They grabbed a 3-way switch instead of a single pole switch, and then they tied their ground to the third leg of the switch leg for that receptacle. We want for the grounding wire to be attached to the yoke, right? So if you see, this screw is actually attached to the yoke. The metal strap is what this screw is attached to. That's what we want for our grounding wire to be attached to. So we're gonna tighten that down, right? So now then, we've got our receptacle installed here. We're gonna fold our wire. We're not just gonna shove it in there. We're gonna fold our wires back so that they're out of the way and we can mount our receptacle, right? I'm gonna leave the screws out of this one so that you guys can pull it out later and take a look at it, right? The other side, we would do the same thing, right? We're gonna strip off some wire here. Being careful not to get into the jacket of the wire. Only the outer jacket of the Romex is all we're getting through, and we're peeling that back to the point where it comes into the box. Those wires out of the way so that I can. And this is the way that I do it. There are ways that may be quicker for you. The main thing is, right, you don't want to be just shoving your knife down into this box, cutting across the Romex where you could cut through the outer sheath and into the jacket of the wire, because if you nick that wire, you're gonna have issues when it comes time to turn it on. And so then this one is not going through, so this one would just be a wiring it up. We would wire it up just like we did the last one, but only on 2 screws instead of on both sets.